Hello YouTube, welcome to part 3 of our series about mandolin tone. Okay guys, as promised, today we're going to talk about A models and different mandolin tone. The opposite of the first two videos, I'm starting out with the more modern sound with this little Collings. Before we jump in, anybody that's looking for some Skype sessions, you can hit me up through an email that you'll find in the description of each video. There's also a PayPal account attached to that description if you want to support the channel that way. All right, so A model mandolins are really cool. For the bigger part of 25 years or so, I didn't own an A model. And then as I was really lucky when I moved to South Carolina, a builder named Walter Johnson, who builds the June mandolins, was my neighbor. He's left the area now, but I got to see him a good bit and visit his shop and play the great mandolins that he builds, some of which are A models. And I just always enjoyed that and kind of worked my way back into it. I'm going to use a Stanley A model later in the video to kind of demonstrate the more traditional sound. But these two particular instruments are an amazing bang for your buck. These Collings MTs you can pick up. This one's beat up pretty bad. I took this as part of a trade on another deal that I had going on and figured that I'd get it, and try to get the money right back out of it as I needed it. It was part of my pandemic preparation to move some stuff around, but just fell in love with the sound of this thing and the playability of it. As you could hear on the front of the video, some of you guys might think, hey, that doesn't even sound like Wayne if you're used to what I do in the bluegrass setting. But when I play an A model mandolin, it just makes me feel more like maybe dabbling with some swing improv, something like that. And I also tend to play A models anytime that I'm just working on fretboard studies. If you watch the channel, you know that I have a good bit of fretboard study, or eat your vegetables, whatever you want to call it. When I do that kind of work at home, a lot of times it's on one of my A model mandolins. And I almost always teach with on one of my A models. They're really cool. For some of you guys that feel like it has to be an F5 to get the job done as a mandolin, you should check some A models out because there's great stuff out there. And this one, even though it has the rounder sounding note and not as much of a point, it still function very well in a bluegrass setting as well. It has plenty of that bite. A nice chop. A lot of times these thicker sounding mandolins, chop wise, we haven't talked about this yet, but if you're playing on stage, depending on how the microphone is EQ'd that you're playing through, sometimes a thicker chop like that actually comes across nicer in the house than if it was one of the more focused kind of sounds of the more traditional mandolin. There's so many elements that do come into play, and we're going to talk about more of that in the fourth video of this series. But things like that that would determine, you know, if you had a mandolin that was in each of those camps and you had it with you when you were doing a sound check, you might discover that in one particular scenario with the sound equipment that you were playing on, it would push you in one direction or the other. Not that we're always going to have two different sounds like that. I'm just, you know, trying to make you guys aware of reasons to want mandolins with different tonal characteristics. So this one, as A model mandolins are supposed to do, it basically sounds like a Collings F model. A lot of these mandolins lean more to the modern sound, the Collings instruments that I've played. I've had a couple of students that owned some of the far more expensive varnished F5s, and they had the rounder tone. They were great feeling mandolins to play, just like this one. It's like really fun to play. It makes you want to pick, which is everything that we're looking for in an instrument. So I'm going to grab my Stanley A model. I have to do an edit here, and then we'll see what's going on with it. Okay, here we are with this Stanley A model mandolin that I've owned several years. This one came up for sale on Mandolin Cafe, and I had actually owned Stanley F5 number 30 that was a crackerjack F5 mandolin, and I used it with another deal, a trade, or maybe I sold it outright. I really don't remember, and I really missed that instrument, and this A model happened to come up on the cafe not long after that, so I feel like I was able to replace that sound and playability and just the vibe of these Stanley mandolins. So if you are in the more traditional camp as far as your taste in sound, I don't know how plentiful these are. I don't know how many of these he builds, but if you do run across one, it'd be a great idea to check it out. Again, for not having to spend, not having to break the bank, as they say, these mandolins really are responsive and have that just more of a mid-range. I'll play some of the C swingy stuff because that's what I was doing on the collar. So much fun to swing out a little bit on an A model. This one does have that more focused kind of sound on the bluegrass stuff. You can see me automatically when I start going for more of that bite. I'm kind of closer to the bridge. We'll get into that in part 4 of this. We're going to talk about different strings, pick hold, different picks that you use, and the things that help you to, to move in one direction or the other. But a lot of it does start with the overall tonal characteristics of the mandolin that you're playing. So this has been 2 really cool things, to see these A models. Again, just in the whole spirit of things that are more affordable, with that being part of what we're talking about compared to part 2 of the video with the Old Fern and the Gilchrist that I used in that. If you're going down to more of an entry-level instrument, the Kentucky mandolins, from what I've seen, tend to lean more to a traditional kind of sound, and the Eastman mandolins are more like a Collings, or more of a modern sound. That doesn't hold true all the time, but if I had to put those 2, manufacturers into one camp or the other, that's what I would have to say. The Kentuckys were more traditional, and the Eastmans were more of the modern sound. So if you're more in that price range, you could keep that in mind. I wish I had a couple of those, to use as part of this series to demonstrate those 2, so that we kind of have different tiers, because we got to face it, different people are spending different amounts of money to try to pull this off. So I'm doing what I can to, to maybe talk about all of that and open all of it up. Anything that you guys want to put in the comments about this, I would appreciate that. And other people could maybe experiences that you've had with those entry level instruments are different than mine. It's not like I've played a ton of those mandolins, maybe between 6 and 10 of each of those manufacturers. I have been able to be exposed to those through some of the students I have that play them, and a lot of them are really great instruments for the amount of money that you'd have to spend there. So we'll keep all of this in mind, and we will move on to part 4 after this and look at some of the other gear involved to help us achieve the tone that we're going for.